We are
You know RJ, right? RJ Storm? Oh,
So
well, no, he's not just a he was great. He moved to oh, this guy, I'm going to tell you, this guy.
it's not beautiful.
We are living neath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. I am alone, I am searching, hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced at the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfection, it be my crime. In humility, I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living neath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. On this journey through thoughts and feelings, finding intuition, my head, my heart, I am gathering the tools together. I'm preparing to do my part. All of those who have come before me band together and be my guide. Loving lessons that I will follow. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living neath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. When we get there, we'll discover all of the gifts we've been given to share have been with us since life's beginning, and we never noticed they were there. We can balance at the brink of wisdom, never recognizing that we've arrived. Loving spirits will live together. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living neath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side.
Finally, I can see my speech. Well, good afternoon. Am I speaking well enough into the mic? Yes. Welcome to our celebration of the life of Connie Hogarth.
We are living the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live forever. We're all swimming to the other side. I am alone, I am searching, hungering for answers in my time. I am balanced at the brink of wisdom. I'm impatient to receive a sign. I move forward with my senses open. Imperfections be my crime. In humility I will listen. We're all swimming to the other side. We are living beneath the great big dipper. We are washed by the very same rain. We are swimming in the stream together, some in power and some in pain. We can worship this ground we walk on, cherishing the beings that we live beside. Loving spirits will live.
No problem, that's my fault.
Stop it, Jason.
We're in good company, I see.
Where are you? You should be pinned.
Yeah, he's spotlighted.
Okay, here we go.
All right, thank you.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome. And now back to that photograph. Connie on the phone in WESPAC's offices in downtown White Plains. This is exactly Connie's pose the first time I met her, some 50 years ago in 1974. Probably everybody here has the same exact story. At that time, a recent college graduate, I found Connie and WESPAC, the struggle for racial, economic, and climate justice, for a nuclear-free world, and an end to the war in Vietnam, to be life-changing and life-saving. I am deeply and forever grateful to Connie and a wonderful band of comrades from those days on the WESPAC Administrative Committee with whom I shared these life experiences. These good comrades include Andrew Courtney, Charlie Shiner, Mike Levinson, Joyce Hanson, Julie Karen, Joanne Robinson, all of whom are here with us today, and they include many others who are no longer with us, who we honor and celebrate along with Connie. Peace, justice, no news, protest and survive. These are Connie's great signature lines and WESPAC's call to action still today. Nana Cotter, WESPAC Foundation's tireless and amazing executive director, had big shoes to fill when she took over from Connie. For the past 20 years, and continuing to this day, Nana has filled those shoes beautifully, making her own mark on WESPAC. Under her leadership, we continue to educate, agitate, and organize for a fair economy that works for all and for an end to militarism and racism. WESPAC acts and advocates on behalf of criminal justice reform and police accountability, food justice, fair housing, climate justice, safe renewable energy, immigrant protection, solidarity with indigenous peoples, an end to militarism and drone warfare, and justice, equal rights, and human dignity for all the inhabitants of Israel, Palestine. There's not enough time in the day. And of course, the struggle continues. As threats of fascism and autocracy are ever growing, as militarism is ever expanding, as environmental disaster is ever present, and as class solidarity seems so difficult to attain. Progressive voices and movements continue to be marginalized and ignored in popular discourse and mainstream media. Yet we know that organizations such as WESPAC and so many others across the U.S. and internationally are there doing the day in and day out work that needs to be done. And now I'd like to invite Charlie Shiner to this stage to talk more about Connie and more about WESPAC. Please welcome Charlie.
Thank you, Howard, and thank you, everybody, for being part of this movement. I was listening to Howard talk about those days. I remember when he and I were trying to figure out how to use word processing for WESPAC. He must have been, he probably had the first personal computer anybody ever knew, because he had a home office. Anyway, it's been a long journey, and the journey continues. I was privileged to know Connie for most of her 96 years on Earth, and to work closely with her at WESPAC for more than 2 decades. She was my mentor, my inspiration, my teacher, my role model, and my extremely supportive close friend. It is impossible to summarize what she meant to me and to humanity in a few minutes. Before I explore Connie's accomplishments at WESPAC, and I'm going to talk more about WESPAC in the past, Howard talked about what WESPAC's doing now, I'd like to mention a few of her qualities. Connie was loving and supportive to everyone she encountered, and especially to current and future comrades in the peace and justice movement. Connie practiced what is now called intersectionality, welcoming diverse people and organizations into all aspects of her work and her life. Connie was committed to nonviolence. She not only opposed violence, but saw the innate value in every human being, treating them with respect, regardless of their role or actions. Her aura of love helped many people who worked as police or in the arms industry realize that their job may be inconsistent with their humanity. Connie radiated optimism, even in the most difficult times. She joked about her, quote, perhaps excessive optimism, and compared it with, quote, my quote, realism to perhaps sometimes pessimism, striking a fair balance for WESPAC's planning, end quote. Connie's optimism has also been good for me. Connie found ways to rejoice even in the midst of struggle. In her words, quote, the end point is not grim, it's joy. Emma Goldman said, if I can't dance, I don't want to be in your revolution. It encompasses the struggle for a happier, better life. If it's grim, what the heck? There's too much that's good. When I think of my heroes, Mandela, Chavez, Gandhi, each one of them typifies a life of hope and great struggle. That was a quote from Connie. Connie prioritized young people, mentoring future generations. When I was 28, I was the oldest person besides Connie in our affinity group at Seabrook. There's a picture of it outside. The rest were mostly high school students, many of whom continued the struggle for social justice. Connie's WESPAC University provided internships, training, and employment for hundreds of Mason's activists. Connie's leadership at WESPAC endured 6 presidents, from Nixon to Clinton. It built on the 1930s old left and the 1960s new left. In the early 70s, the Westchester movement against the U.S. war in Vietnam had many town-based groups, but they were difficult to sustain after Americans stopped coming home in body bags. As a result, the Westchester Peace Council merged with the Mobilization for Domestic Unity, which opposed cuts in social programs, to form WESPAC. In 1983, Connie gave a talk where she described WESPAC's beginnings. Quote, during the early 70s, WESPAC would meet once a month in offices and churches for show and tell sessions. Irene Dickinson would tell us about Indian Point, the Civil Liberties Union was worried about criminal code reform, and we were all concerned about Nixon's budget cuts and the invisibility of a peace dividend. Nuclear weapons mentality was burgeoning, and the B-1 bomber had come on the scene. At one meeting, when we first projected the vision of having a WESPAC home instead of our peripatetic state, I didn't think we could afford to have a center. Close quote. A few of us persuaded Connie that we had to create WESPAC as an alternative to despair, and that she had to be the executive director. To quote Connie again, so we literally rolled up our sleeves after finding a huge and filthy loft on Mamaroneck Avenue in White Plains. Scraped, painted, and did fundraising and a pledge campaign with borrowed money, and most of you know the rest. WESPAC is viable, growing, and more needed than ever. That was true when she said it 40 years ago, and it's still true today. We didn't have computers, email, internet, or mobile phones. We held mailing parties, community building events, to stuff mimeograph newsletters into envelopes with Xerox mailing labels. We communicated through telephone trees and in-person meetings, signed petitions on paper, and visited or protested in front of politicians and war-making institutions. Connie led WESPAC for 23 years, motivating, inspiring, and influencing thousands of people. The WESPAC Coalition included dozens of activist organizations with a wide range of priorities. On one or two of those issues. After a few years on Mamaroneck Avenue, WESPAC moved to the edge of the Windbrook Housing Project in White Plains. It was the birthplace of the Westchester Coalition for Legal Abortion, CASA Westchester, and Westchester Now, and the mutually supportive neighbor across the hall of the Afro-American Cultural Foundation and Gay Liberation of Westchester. Connie and WESPAC forged the growing Westchester movement for nonviolent resistance to nuclear weapons, nuclear power, militarism, racism, injustice, abusive capitalism, and the U.S.-sanctioned oppression and wars in places as diverse as South Africa, Cuba, Central America, Vietnam, and Palestine. Connie visited every one of those places to demonstrate her dissent and her solidarity. In 1979, Connie organized and led nonviolence trainings for what was then the largest civil disobedience action in U.S. history, the occupation of the secret nuclear power plant site in New Hampshire. After 2 weeks in jail, Connie and WESPAC brought the struggle home, forming the SHAD Alliance and organizing civil disobedience at Shoreham on Long Island and Indian Point, just up the river from here. Although we prevented Shoreham from stopping operations, it took more than 4 decades to shut down Indian Point. Connie was arrested more than 20 times for nonviolent civil disobedience, refusing to cooperate with manifestations of injustice and militarism too numerous to list today. But her main work was organizing, recruiting and training activists, educating the press and the public, pressuring politicians and companies, building movements. Connie had run for New York State Assembly in 1974, and her loss focused her attention on WESPAC and on direct action, through which she achieved far more than she would have in Albany. However, she stayed active in progressive Democratic politics and worked for candidates including Ramsey Clark, Jesse Jackson, and Bernie Sanders. Although WESPAC was an 80-hour-a-week commitment, Connie found time to be a national leader in coalitions organizing around the first and second UN Special Sessions on Disarmament. She served on the boards of WBAI Radio, Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, Clearwater, the Westchester Civil Liberties Union, the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, the National Rainbow Coalition, and other essential organizations. She also built a loving relationship with Art Camel, who courted her during our action at the Women's Peace Encampment at Seneca Army Depot. After Connie retired, quotes, from WESPAC in 1996, she again demonstrated her foresight, alerting me and many others to the dangers of human-caused climate change. As she has for my entire adult life, Connie knew what was important and had advocated for it with compassion, integrity, nonviolence, and effectiveness. She continued to mentor young people at Manhattanville College and was active on many issues in her new Dutchess County home. As I wrote in the program, her love, inspiration, example, perseverance, and optimism are sorely missed, but they live on in each of us. The best way to honor Connie is to emulate her. Connie concluded every talk with extensive information on upcoming events and current campaigns, supporting the organizers and encouraging people to participate. Instead, I'll finish with one of her favorite poems, which she read as our affinity group stood in a circle after being arrested at the Electric Boat Nuclear Submarine Factory in Connecticut. This is the poem called The Low Road by Marge Piercy. What can they do to you? Whatever they want. They can set you up, they can bust you, they can break your fingers, they can burn your brain with electricity, blur you with drugs till you can't walk, can't remember. They can take your child, wall up your lover. They can do anything. You can't stop them from doing it. How can you stop them? Alone, you can fight, you can refuse, you can take what revenge you can, but they roll over you. But two people fighting back to back can cut through a mob. A snake dancing file can break through a cordon. An army can meet an army. Two people can keep each other sane, can give support, conviction, love, massage, hope, sex. Three people are a delegation, a committee, a wedge. With four, you can play bridge and start an organization. With six, you can rent a whole house, eat pie for dinner with no seconds, and hold a fundraising party. A dozen make a demonstration. 100 fill a hall. 1,000 have solidarity in your own newsletter. 10,000 power in your own paper. 100,000 your own media. 10 million your own country. It goes on one at a time. It starts when you care to act. It starts when you do it again and they said no. It starts when you say we and you know who you mean. And each day you need one more. Thank you.
Please now welcome Teresa Murphy Hicks to the stage.
Good afternoon. I don't have a long sheet of data and information. I can only talk from my heart. And I met Connie in 1974. It was referred as the Merrimack Avenue, but the interest was Post Road. In 1974, they were having a woman's credit union that was developing. Unfortunately, it didn't get as far as we wanted it to get. But who was there besides me and my two children? One was 3 and the other was 2. And we were there, and this lady comes over to me and said, "Would you like to join us?" I said, "Okay." I'm from the Bronx. I married a person who was a white man and still is. And I thought nothing was happening here. I said, this is about the dullest place I've ever seen in my life. Until I met Connie. She's more than an inspiration because I went on every walk, every sit down, whatever she did, I was there. And I felt very good about it. She would have potluck dinners when we moved to Grove Street, upstairs, across from Mr. Harmon. And she would have films which educated me more than you could ever know. Well, in 1979, I gave birth to twins. And that's important, just put it there. And my children, the first 2, they were growing up with my thoughts in mind. What was not mentioned was also what was happening was the city of Mount Vernon, White Plains, New Rochelle, and Yonkers put a federal case for firemen. That was a treacherous time for me and my children. They had never seen such a thing, but who supported that? Connie. And that was important to get the community's support. I was called up, but my twins were not even a year, and I was told that my house would be bombed. They didn't know that I was from the Bronx, so we'll just pass over that. I told them 3 choice words, which I know all of you very nice people don't know about. And I said, I'm waiting for you. I'll be outside. And you have a mother too. And that was the last phone call I got. I don't know why. But we went on our marches, and one march was the Women's March to Washington, D.C. By then, the twins were about 9 years old. And who led it? My twin son, Damani. He would say, "What are we here for?" And everybody would repeat, and why they were here. I couldn't believe it if I had not seen it myself. So what's happened in the last 50 years? That's right, my son turned 50 in December, my daughter 51. They are true troopers. They're troopers because Connie allowed them to be a part of the organization. When Jesse Jackson was supposed to come, my daughter, then about, I don't know, 12 years old, was to answer the phone. We were all involved with WESPAC. And it informed their ideas of what's right, what's wrong, that we can't have nuclear powers within our community. We had to have clean water. That's not me. Connie helped to form the ideas of these now grown people. And that's what was important to me. She never put it down, and you know, you've been around some people, and they don't want kids around. But Connie, that was not true of her. And she knew their names, and my kids knew their names, her name. We would have potluck dinners, and they were always welcomed. They were always one of the youngest kids that were in the environment, but they were welcome. And we went down, I think to the UN Plaza. They were there. And so were the twins, Joanne and Roberta, and their mother. We were all there, very happy to be there. The twins were in strollers, so you know how. That was the beginning of 1980. She was a remarkable woman. And you don't get that. She was true to the cause. That is important to not to give up. Because a lot of people that I knew that were true to the cause, especially when I was in undergraduate school, are no longer true to the cause. But I can't say that about Connie. And I just want to thank you. You got to meet my kids someday because they will tell you what time it is. They're all vocal. They understand where the enemy is. The enemy, the enemy, the enemy. And they will argue with you till you pass out. I know we were visiting cousins in Washington. And my daughter then was, I don't know, 18, 19. I heard her talk about the elements in our society that we need to change. But they were part of WESPAC. They didn't just hear their mother say it. They were part of it. So if so many people's hair is very much like mine. When I met Connie, I was cute. 120 pounds. Gained a few pounds, my hair turned. So if you have grandchildren, even the kid next door, please help mold that child. Because they get a lot of the information from their environment, which is correct. So let's take our lead from Connie and nourish them, love them, and I thank you.
Thank you.
And so that we can dance in Connie's revolution, I now invite Emma's revolution.
great to see you all here.
I walked in and saw those pictures of Connie, and I was like, she should just be here, right? Yeah. She should be here.
Yeah, Connie was the heartbeat. Connie was our home in the Hudson Valley. Connie was our family. And, you know, when we came in weary travelers at some ungodly hour, we'd see that blue glow up in the office. Connie was still on the computer. So Connie was our people. And you all are our people. And all of those young people that Connie organized are our people. So this is one of our pandemic era songs when we were at home.
You can sing it with us.
Yeah.
Connie would want you to.
So would Pete. Pete would require it. Yeah. Our people gonna rise. Our people gonna rise. Listen to our cries through the pain and lies. Our people gonna rise. Our people gonna sing.
Our people gonna sing.
Our people gonna sing.
Fire and the flame, hear our freedom ring. Our people gonna sing.
Our people gonna fight.
Our people gonna fight.
Our people gonna fight.
What we know is right, and march into the night. Our people gonna fight.
Our people gonna grieve.
Our people gonna grieve.
Our people gonna grieve.
Whatever you believe, you have the right to breathe. Our people gonna grieve.
Our people gonna pray.
Our people gonna pray.
Our people gonna pray.
Take our rights away, bring you on the wretched day. Our people gonna pray.
Our people gonna rise.
Our people gonna rise.
Our people gonna rise.
Listen to our cries through the pain and lies. Our people gonna rise. Our people gonna rise.
Our people gonna rise.
Our people gonna rise.
Our people gonna rise. Thanks so much. Yeah, Connie she was on the computer, but she was also always telling us about what was going on and where, to keep us up to date. Even after we moved to the West Coast, we're in the Sacramento Valley in California these days, but if Connie came back from a board meeting at Clearwater or at BAI, stuff was going on, she'd keep us apprised of all of that. And she really did instill that, you know, one of the things that I loved about Connie, because I sort of grew up in an era of folks being very focused on single issue politics, and I loved how global and how comprehensive her view of justice was, and that all of these things were really connected.
And that her view included music and art and dance, and that you know, all of these arts keep us inspired to keep on, keeping on. I really want a T-shirt that says WWCD. You know, what would Connie do? Because she's such a leader, and we were always had the joy of coming and playing at Manhattanville for some of the kids, you know, some of the younger people home in Connie Hogarth Center, and just passing on that concept of leaders, and being leaders together, because that's how we get it done.
In
despised and ignored in the mainstream media. Yet, we know that voices such as Amy Goodman's and Democracy Now! Are there, doing the day in and day out research and reporting on the causes and consequences of the political and economic disasters in our midst, and what people on the ground are doing to resist, overcome, and transform them. And now, to continue our celebration of the life and times of Connie Hogarth, it is my great pleasure to welcome Amy Goodman, the host and executive producer of Democracy Now! Welcome, Amy. Here today on Zoom across the country and around the world.
Oh my gosh, it is such an honor to be here, to honor Connie, to follow Emma's revolution. What a fantastic singing duo. I am looking forward to the documentary. And to follow Charlie Shiner, who is so seminal. WESPAC, right, that C at the end, Connie, Charlie, all the folks that have contributed, and now, well, it's the K, but Donna Potter, and so many others who have made WESPAC what it is, and this is the key, what it will be. Because the fact that Connie helped start this institution that continues through today and has so much to take on at this point. Oh, I also want to introduce Zazu. I think Connie would approve Zazu's name. Everyone always says, "Oh, Lion King, right?" Well, I didn't know about that until after I named her that. But no, Zazu is named for the Zazu of occupied France, named for the young people in France who fought the Nazis, fought the Gestapo. They loved jazz and swing. They went to the underground expat clubs. But they knew what they stood for, and the Gestapo would get them, but they would continue to fight, and that's who Zazu is named for. They are the freedom fighters. She's a freedom fighter, but Connie Hogarth. I can't remember the first time I met Connie. I think she invited me to some event, but I became a lifelong fan. I have to say I'm a little glad that in 1994 she lost that primary for the New York State Assembly. Sorry, Connie. But think of what she created instead. She was an institution and she built institutions. I mean, the fact that she went from WESPAC to the Manhattanville Connie Hogarth Center for Social Action, going to where people were who didn't even know that they needed that center. But she constantly looked ahead. I was just reviewing some of the media that she was in. For example, when I think it was C-SPAN came to White Plains and they interviewed Connie, I mean, among the first words out of her mouth as she talked about her role models of Gandhi and King was quoting Dr. King, saying the choice is not between violence and nonviolence, but between nonviolence and non-existence. She taught every time she opened her mouth. And I can see her right there in the front row. Okay, enough, Connie, tell us more about other things right now. And as Charlie talked about intersectionality, before Kimberly Crenshaw coined that term, which is so important. I mean, that defines Connie's life, that every issue intersects with every other. That you can't talk about racial justice and economic justice and social justice without talking about peace, fair, just peace, without, the idea that peace is is not just the absence of war, but you have to wage peace every day.
Every day.
We don't just achieve democracy. You have to fight for it every single day. Just think about this past week. You know, I had the honor of interviewing Justin Jones on Friday. You know, the Justins, Justin Jones and Justin Pearson, the two youngest Black representatives in the Tennessee State House of Representatives. And they're expelled by the Republican supermajority in the House of Tennessee. That doesn't even represent the people of Tennessee. It's not as if Justin Jones, who was on Democracy Now! A few times, it's not as if it was his first go-around with Cameron Sexton, the House Speaker. Right? He was fighting him before he was a legislator. As a Black Lives Matter activist, when in 1920, when you walk into the Tennessee House of Representatives, into the Tennessee House Capitol, and you see the bust of Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founding Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, which was founded in Tennessee. And Justin Jones led the fight to remove that bust, and Cameron Sexton voted to keep it up there, greeting people as they came into the House of Representatives. But Justin won that one, as he will continue to win. And then having Justin Jones on, you'd think that the Montana legislature would learn from what happened in Tennessee, right? I mean, the idea that Zoe Zephyr, the first and only openly trans woman in the Montana House of Representatives, she represents Missoula, very close to my heart because my first college roommate was from Missoula. Her dad was the band leader of Hellgate High. Zoe Zephyr, you know, she watches what happens to the Justins. They're expelled, but then because of movements on the ground like Connie built in Westchester, in Tennessee, you know, they're fighting for her in both Memphis and Nashville, vote to put them back in. You'd think that would be a bit of a lesson to the Montana Assembly, but they too, when Zoe Zephyr stands up and speaks out and says she knew a young person, a young trans person who watched the hearings in the Montana House and attempted to take her own life. She said, when that happens, blood is on your hands, she said to the Assembly. And just like in Tennessee, they told her she had violated decorum. And maybe they learned a little. They didn't vote to expel her. They voted, though, to silence her. And they succeeded, maybe in the well of the House, but not in the United States of America. I mean, that voice is now so amplified, and I could just see Connie, if she were alive today, repeating Zoe Zephyr's words, blood is on your hands, and ensuring that people all over would hear this. But Zoe Zephyr and Justin Jones then talking to each other, you know, what it means to take on fascism. Zazu grumbles at those words. No bones about it. And the fact that Connie not only led WESPAC, but also served on so many boards, was deeply involved with the first and second UN special sessions on disarmament as we cover the war in Ukraine, Putin violating every international law and with his brutality in invading Ukraine. But then what should happen today? What happens when you have a war that can lead to nuclear war? How does the world respond? Tomorrow we're spending the hour with Dan Ellsberg. And I think Dan Ellsberg, Connie Hogarth, and you may have heard that Dan just wrote a letter to all his friends saying he has pancreatic cancer. He feels his time is limited, but he wants to spend it continuing to fight the fight just as Connie did, is so deeply concerned about the use of small nuclear weapons, just as Connie was, not to mention the big ones, and the continuum between nuclear power and nuclear war. I mean, let's see, the first time Connie was arrested was at a die-in, right, against the Vietnam War. And she went to jail for weeks as a result of Seabrook. I was also at those Seabrook protests in the late 1970s. And, you know, the affinity groups there, they really presented a different model of decision-making. And they were so important even beyond nuclear power. And Connie making that connection very early on between nuclear power, fossil fuels, and climate change. She was talking about this well before so many others were. And being on the board of WBAI, of course, a place that is so close to my heart, Pacifica Radio, that Connie understood. It's about organizing, but it's also about getting the message out, but needing democratic institutions to do that. You know, she saw the media as a huge kitchen table that stretches across the globe, that we all sit around and debate and discuss the most important issues of the day, war and peace and life and death. And anything less than that is a disservice to the servicemen and women of this country, because they're the ones who are going to be sent to live or die. Anything less than that is a disservice to a democratic society. And Connie understood that, whether you're talking about police, you're talking about service members, that everyone can be reached with a message of fighting for a just peace. But WBAI is so important, and that she devoted time to being on the board means so much to me. You know, and especially the old-timers here, the importance of Pacifica Radio, WBAI, the New York radio station. Of the 5 stations, right, founded in Berkeley in 1949 by a pacifist named Lou Hill, who came out of the detention camps and said there's got to be a media outlet not run by corporations that profit from war, but run by journalists and artists. And so KPFA was born. And then KPFK in Los Angeles, that was 49, KPFK 59, WBAI in 1960, WPFW, Jazz and Justice Radio, 1977, and KPFT in the Petro Metro in Houston in 1970. And that station, so important, because as soon as it went on the air, the Ku Klux Klan strapped dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it to smithereens. And when they got back on their feet a few weeks later and they rebuilt the transmitter, the Klan strapped 15 times the dynamite to the base of the transmitter and blew it up again in the middle of Arlo Guthrie singing Alice's Restaurant, which I actually think is a good song. And then, you know, months later, 1971, January, they get back on their feet again. Arlo comes back to Houston to finish Alice's Restaurant on the air. And I can't remember if it was the Grand Dragon or the Exalted Cyclops, because I often confuse their titles. He said it was his proudest act, because he understood how dangerous Pacifica is, dangerous independent media is. This is why Connie sat on the board of WBAI. Dangerous because it allows people to speak for themselves. And when you hear someone speaking from their own experience, whether it's a Palestinian child or an Israeli grandmother, whether it is an aunt in Afghanistan or an uncle in Iraq, whether it's a kid in the South Bronx or Standing Rock Sioux member in North Dakota taking on the Dakota Access Pipeline, when you hear them speaking for themselves, it changes you. Now, you may not agree with who you're listening to, right? I mean, how often do we agree with our family members? But it makes it much less likely that you'll want to destroy the person. It's because that understanding is the beginning of peace. I think the media can be the greatest force for peace on earth Instead, all too often, it's wielded as a weapon of war. And that's why we have to take the media back. That's why Connie sat on the board of WBAI, understanding how critical it is that we have a media that's not brought to you when we cover War and Peace by Boeing and McDonnell Douglas. When we are covering the climate catastrophe, that we have a media that's not brought to you by the oil, the gas, the coal, the nuclear companies. As Connie knows well, from Seabrook to Indian Point, from 3 Mile Island to Shoreham. Now, I grew up in Long Island. My parents were very active in trying to prevent Shoreham from going online. Ultimately, it was, well, they flipped it on for a second just to make it radioactive. It is astounding what they did with Shoreham, but it was a people's movement that stopped it, and how important that was. And the question of where we go today when it comes to energy independence. These are the issues that Connie really led the way in at least asking the absolutely critical questions. And I'm so deeply grateful to Connie for that. I mean, Connie's presence in all of our lives changed us and changed the world. To lose Connie last year, I mean, we weren't really losing her. She had built so much, and that's what we're all responsible for continuing today. I wanted to also just talk about Timor, because the East Timor Action Network, what Charlie did with the East Timor Action Network, actually came out of, branched out of, WESPAC was the fiscal sponsor. And the idea that on the other side of the planet is a country that for a long time was connected to the US through the barrel of a gun. People in the United States didn't know that. When Indonesia invaded East Timor, 90% of the weapons were from the United States. The Indonesian army, the 4th largest in the world, was armed, trained, and financed by the United States. But through WESPAC, leading to East Timor Action Network at the national level, people came to understand in this country one of the great genocides of the late 20th century. I believe it was David Obey at the time, the Congress member from Wisconsin, who said after E-10 was born and organized all over the country, he got more calls on the issue of East Timor than on any other foreign policy issue. Wow. It took a number of years, but in 1999, the people of East Timor got to vote for their freedom. They cared deeply about what E-10 had done in the United States and a similar organization done in Canada, and Australians against the occupation had done. It really mattered. And the fact that Connie Hogarth here in the United States understood power and understood we have a special responsibility here. Years ago, and I hope someone sees Azu somewhere.
Right that way.
Okay. Years ago, I interviewed a woman from Guyana about the Red Thread Collective there. And we use our music breaks to unseat people who've just finished a segment and give time. So when you have someone like Emma's Revolution, you could go on and on, right? Just listen to them. You don't realize we're shooing people out and shooing people in for the next second. So I was saying goodbye to her and welcoming the next guest for a segment on the U.S. elections. Democracy Now! Was the first daily election show in public broadcasting 27 years ago. And she appreciates the applause. And I said to her, okay, well, we're going to do something on the U.S. election. I said, oh, I'll be a guest on that segment. I said, oh, but why? And she said, because I believe everyone in the world should get to vote for president of the United States. And it was such a blessing to me, what she was saying is, who you choose here matters to everyone in the world. Which brings us back to this level of activism that Connie was a center of a solar system in Westchester. Understanding that what you do locally, and it all starts locally, has implications all over the world. So I wanted to end with a poem. I don't know who wrote this poem. I think it was a teacher in Baltimore, and I added a few lines to it. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not here. I'm going to start again. Do not stand at my grave and weep. I am not there. I do not sleep. I am 1,000 winds that blow. I am the diamond glints on snow. I am the sunlight on ripened grain. I am the gentle autumn rain. I am the full-throated chant from fight back to close it down to no more war. I am the voice joining millions around the world. Peace is what we are fighting for. When you awaken in the morning's hush, I am the swift, uplifting rush of quiet birds in circling flight. I am the soft star that shines at night. Do not stand at my grave and cry. I am not there. I did not die. Presente, Connie Hogarth.
Well, it's absolutely our honor to open for and follow this amazing woman, Amy Goodman. Thank you so much. Who we didn't know was a poet. Or also, we didn't know that you enjoyed puns, and that must have been fun. But we do want to thank Amy. She agreed to be interviewed for a documentary that is being made about us and our justice music work, and we're honored for that. Thank you so much.
And clearly that is part of the revolution. So, of course, when we would come and hang out with Holly, that's funny, with Connie, when he was around, we would go up the hill and see Pete. And so many of the events that Connie organized, of course, Pete was part of. In those last days of Pete's, I came up to the valley to pick up Connie at the hospital and take her back home and then bring her back down to the hospital to be with Pete. And as Pete went on to his next adventure, because I'm sure that energy went on to next adventures, I started writing the song at Connie's house, and Sandy came into town the next morning. Connie knew, as Pete knew, the power of individual voices and the power of individual voices coming together. So this song has a chorus for you all.
Isn't that Pete who said that thing about conspiracies? The act of breathing together.
Couldn't know
living his life and all the gifts he brings. Oh, hear the mental ring, hear the people sing. Oh, changes everything. Sing, people sing. Stood up till before these rays, rallied for a living wage, rode with woody march with Dr. D. They believe brought us the most, taught us deep in every soul. Told me by your side, you got to most anything. You showed us how the world could be, living with integrity. Together we create a force beyond imagining. As I observed in dim light, felt a spark ignite. And I demonstrated all today to hear the mental ring. Oh, hear the mental ring. Hear the people sing. Oh, changes everything. Sing, people sing again. Oh, hear the mental ring. Hear the people sing. Here we go. Oh, changes everything. Sing, people sing. Sing, people sing. Sing, people Thank you so much. You know, it's not like Connie had a favorite song that she would always ask us to play, but we would play her whatever was the latest thing we had written for the latest demonstration. And because that's how we like to do what we do, is show up with the song for whatever event we were singing at. And that would mean that sometimes we were writing things very late at night and then singing them the next morning, like this song when we were joining Jane Fonda and a ton of climate activists of all ages for the Fire Drill Fridays down in DC. And that movement, the Fire Drill Fridays, was really to say, we know that a lot of attention is coming our way, you know, Jane Fonda particularly, and other leaders that she would bring in, but we want to turn that attention on the young climate activists, the way that everyone's been speaking about, Connie, knowing to, let's lift up the young activists. And so, when we say in the song, we love you, we hear you, this is how we wrote for people of our age to sing to the young climate activists who are saying, we really need you to take some action to get it together for our futures. So, and we quote Greta Thunberg in the song who said, I need you to act like your house is on fire, because it is. So your part is put out the fire. Let us put out the fire of racism, of sexism, of homophobia, of climate change, of anti-trans legislation, of fascism, what? Of war.
It's a lot of fires to put out.
Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. Put out the fire, put out the fire, put out the fire, our house is on fire. We love you, we hear you, we come into right in Connie's house.
Oh, that's right.
That's right. So when we would come, we would stay in that downstairs room for folks who'd been at Connie's house. But there was also the upstairs office where Pat was saying you could always see the blue light because she was at the computer. And on the floor of that office is where we figured out how to write. Isn't that at Connie's house?
Yeah, it was. You know, we were living in the DC area by now. We had just moved, and we had actually and on that very lonely drive up from the DC area to New York. You know, because it was really short, within a month of September 11th, and very few cars were on the road, and we saw how quickly the flags went up, and the wanted posters, and the Nuke Bin Laden graffiti, and we just thought, the peace movement needs to speak out now, you know, just as quickly as we can, and get out ahead of this move towards war, because there's gonna obviously be a war. So, we were asked to sing this song. Actually, we sang this on Democracy Now! The first time we really sang it publicly.
So just lineage-wise, we wrote this song on September 11th. That morning is when you started saying these words to yourself: peace, salam, and shalom.
Yeah, peace in English, peace in Arabic, and peace in Hebrew.
And we sang it at the first demonstration on that Friday after, when it was a national day of prayer, you might remember. But there was a demonstration in DC, and we sang it there. And then we came up to New York City that next day, that Saturday, so just within the same week. And we brought this song, I think it was the 14th, we were actually on your show or something around there, Amy, right after that.
Close to that time.
And because Democracy Now! Was broadcasting nonstop, as I know Amy remembers, but maybe many of you remember.
Yeah.
It was really as close as anyone could get. You couldn't get farther than Canal Street. And it was just a continual coverage of what was happening, but also a continual coverage of from the activist perspective. What was happening with undocumented workers? What was happening at the demonstrations that were popping up in Union Square? And we were there to sing, as Amy described, when we were moving people in and out, but to sing, and we sang this song there. And we brought it back up when we were coming less than a month later to sing it at the first peace demonstration that was organized in New York City.
And it's gone to many places in the world, including to a forward operating base in Afghanistan with a young military chaplain who took it there. You know, he took this job feeling that he could start to create peace from the inside. And as he got on the ground in Afghanistan in Helmand province, he heard how the U.S. Soldiers were, in his words, dehumanizing the allies, the Afghanistan allies that were there to fight with them. And he played a beautiful video that was made of this song by his denomination. And shortly after he started playing it, the Afghanistan soldiers, the soldiers there, their allies, came and started gathering around the outside of this military tent, makeshift chapel there, up high on a ridge above the Sangin River, because they had never heard the words peace, salam, and shalom uttered in the same breath before. And there came a point in time. This base was considered the most dangerous place in Afghanistan. And there came a point in time where it was too dangerous for them to remain. So everybody packed everything out, and they were just about to leave. And Seth Bryant, this young chaplain, went back up on that ridge and cranked up the volume on his laptop so that the words peace, salam, shalom would echo through the valley below and be the last words that they left in that war-torn valley.
So you may have sung this with us before it works as a two-part round. Often we have a shirt on that says Michelle on the piece, and that is the shirt that we designed on the floor at Connie's house office. So you can start the song with Pat, or you can come in with me on the second part of the round. You keep those parts going, and we have other parts we'll sing with it, because that's how activism works. We get everyone's voice, our parts work together, and we're louder, more beautiful, and stronger together.
And some of this, I'm going to actually, they also translated it into French and into Spanish, so I'm going to sing some of those lines over top of your part. We'll give you your part first. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Let's go part. Peace, salam, shalom. 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 Looking for the 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 peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam, shalom. Peace, salam,
Talking about the fire, helping us understand the fire, who came all the way from DC today. It's a woman named Phyllis Bennis to talk about Connie Hogarth. Phyllis is a, or perhaps the, preeminent fellow at the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington and at the Amsterdam-based Transnational Institute. As all of you may know already, she's a longtime peace and justice activist, working with the movements for Palestinian rights, ending U.S. wars, and changing U.S. foreign policy more broadly. From a think tank we can proudly call our own, please welcome Phyllis Bennis.
Not just memories, but obligations that Connie has left us with. I wasn't sure I was going to make it up here in time. But what I really want to know, Amy, how did you get that dog on the train? I would have brought my Oscar, but he's like 3 times that size. He was at the big El Salvador demonstration. That's his job. You know, Connie's life parallels in many ways the movements, the progressive movements of the last, I think, 80 years. And I've only known her and her work and been around those movements for maybe 50 years, so I'm like a generation behind. But boy, is there a lot of work to do to catch up. You know, at IPS, we were thinking a lot this week about our great friend Harry Belafonte, who just passed. Harry was on our board, and many of us had the opportunity to work with him on a number of projects. It was a gift. And he and Connie were in many ways very much alike. Not in a whole host of ways, they were not alike at all. But they shared, among other things, the commitment to young people, to the next generations, to bringing people with them, to never just doing stuff themselves. It always had to be with other people. And it's an extraordinary notion. The notion of Connie as the conscience of White Plains. That's what one of the local papers called her at some point. I think they said it in a kind of sarcastic, sort of really she's the conscience of the community. But yeah, she was. And she made this community, I was going to say that she made it better, but she didn't make it better. She enabled whole communities of people to make this a better place. In terms of all of the evils of racism and poverty and injustice and support for war and dealing with the climate in all of those ways, Connie was there. She was insisting on responding to that recognition that she needed to, she saw that there was a crisis. And she said, okay, we've got work to do. Let's go out and do that work. Pete Seeger called her the indefatigable organizer. And coming from Pete, that's a hell of a statement, right? Talk about indefatigable, but it's one of those words that actually nobody should ever try and say that. Right. But this question of whose shoulders do we stand on? Many of us here who are now the elders of our movement, I've got to say the first time somebody introduced me that way, I was turning around, wait, what? That's not me? It's like, yeah, well, it is now. But those of us from our generation, we know whose shoulders we stand on. We stand on the shoulders of Connie Hogarth. We stand on the shoulders of Harry Belafonte. We stand on the shoulders of a generation of heroes who fought in Spain, who went south with the Freedom Riders, who defended the Rosenbergs, who represented the unions, who fought against the blacklist. They were heroes. I sometimes think about my first interactions with some of those on whose shoulders I had stood for so long, but at that time, as a 17, 18-year-old kid, boy, did I not know that. And I cringe at what I thought. But that notion of standing on the shoulders of those who have gone before and bringing along those who come for the future. That's what Connie was all about. That's what she was all about. Connie, I have a feeling that between Amy and Leslie and Pat and Sandy, there's not a whole lot more I can say about Connie that you haven't heard all your lives and know yourselves and just heard in the last hour and a half while I was struggling to get all the way on the train. But this notion that she was arrested in the early period of the anti-war protests around Vietnam, which when I was growing up through junior high and high school into that, it seemed like it had been going on forever. Yeah. When we look back in comparison, it was a war that lasted 10 years in terms of large-scale U.S. engagement. That's nothing compared to what we're seeing in permanent wars. But in that early period, that was, as we just heard from Amy, the die-in in Washington, the first of the die-ins, which became a regular feature of protests of all of our movements. And moving forward, Connie was part of that movement for so many years, for so long, and understood how it linked to the civil rights movement, because war is linked to racism. War is linked to the destruction of climate. War is linked to poverty, because then, as now, more than half of the discretionary federal budget goes directly to the military. And Connie was always among those reminding us of that, and saying you can't not talk about poverty. When I hear these words from Reverend Barber, who I work closely with now from the Poor People's Campaign, who talks about the evils of Martin Luther King Jr.'s evil triplets, racism, poverty, and militarism, and said, and if Dr. King were here today, he would of course add climate, as Connie did. this intersectional notion of what our movements have to fight against and who we are in solidarity with, what other movements are there for us to work with. That's all of what we continue to take away from our time with Connie. The notion that she was able to celebrate the end of the war on today, April 30th. I don't know if other people have talked about that yet. I missed the beginning part. April 30th is the anniversary of the end of the war in Vietnam. The day the Vietnamese won back their liberation and freedom. April 30th, 1975. I remember the day because I was working at the time in Sioux Falls, South Dakota on a legal team representing a group coming out of the AIM struggle against the occupation of Wounded Knee. And there was a sense that night when we watched that famous scene with Walter Cronkite, the conscience of the world, taking off his glasses and looking very serious. I can't do that because I'm blind to the back. He looked around and said, "I'm sorry to have to tell you that Saigon has just fallen." And we thought, no, Saigon is rising. Saigon is rising because it was an occupation that was ending. It was a war that was ending that was not for the people of Vietnam. It certainly was not for the people of the United States. It was for rubber plantations and the billionaires and the Pentagon. And we were thrilled and we were excited and ran down to buy champagne to celebrate, and then suddenly realized that we were in a community who probably did not share our view. But it was an amazing moment. And when I came back, I still didn't know Connie at that time, but I knew the Connie Hogarths all over this country who were leading the local protest movements that together had created this extraordinary national movement that we call the movement against the war in Vietnam, the anti-war movement. There were Connie Hogarths all over the country. Our Connie was just kind of the best of them. But she wasn't the only one. She wasn't the only one. And lots of them knew her and learned from her. And she learned from others as well, because it comes back to this thing of on whose shoulders do we stand? We're all standing on each other's shoulders. The other thing that I think was so important that I think Connie learned in that early period of the Vietnam War movement was that there's a huge movement in this country. In that case, it was to get the troops out, to end the war, get the troops home. And that was the call of the movement as a whole. But within the movement, there was a core of people whose understanding of internationalism and solidarity went beyond simply saying, get the troops out, to say, we stand with those on the other side. We stand with those who are fighting for the liberation of their country, for a social program that means the rights of women, the rights to protect the environment. All are part of what we're fighting for. They were fighting for socialism. And Connie was part of that. And her understanding and the richness of her understanding of internationalism meant that that was her framework. Whether she was working on East Timor, it wasn't just about stopping the sale and gift of arms to the Indonesian army. It was about standing with the people of East Timor as they fought for their own liberation. It was the same thing in South Africa. It was partly about getting the US to stop collaborating with the apartheid regime in South Africa and Namibia. That was huge. But it was also standing with the people of South Africa, standing with the ANC, to say, this is my struggle too. As you struggle for a South Africa for all your people, you are struggling for all of us around the world. And Connie's work against apartheid in South Africa had that at its core, at its root. The same thing was true for Palestine, where Connie took up the struggle for Palestinian rights in the mid to late 1980s, when it was way not popular to do so, when it was a really hard thing. And it was not only that she took it on and said, yeah, of course we have to take up Palestinian rights at WESPAC, because it's part of the struggle for liberation, it's part of the end to colonization around the world, that all of these struggles are linked. But being Connie, she went beyond that as well, and said, this is not always the case. I think if Connie were with us today to talk about Ukraine, she would also be saying, our job is to say, end this war. end this war. We need negotiations. We need a ceasefire. Our job is not to stand militarily. That's a hard position. And Connie took a lot of hard positions. She took the position of supporting Palestinian rights because it was the right thing to do, not because it was popular. I met Connie for the first time after hearing a lot about her when I moved to New York by that time. But I lived in New York, I guess, for about 2 years before I ever met her. And I met her in Jerusalem. I met her at the national, what's it called? The Grand National Palace Hotel in occupied East Jerusalem. She was there with the delegation. I was there working on a book about the First Intifada. And we threw our arms around each other. Oh, you're, and we were sisters from then on. We were comrades, we were friends. I had many nights in the downstairs room. She was always so excited that Pat and Sandy were here just yesterday. You just missed them. I'm like, oh, God, why didn't you tell me that? I would have come yesterday. But it was always part of what Connie did. And then there was the question of how she did the work around Palestine in the context of WESPAC. And one part of that was to say, this shouldn't be treated as something harder than everything else, that's marginal to everything else. This is a normal part of our work. To normalize the issue of Palestinian rights in the context of a broad progressive movement when people were very, very supportive of lots of people's rights, but with that one exception. It was easy. It was easy to be progressive except Palestine. Connie was never willing to accept that. It wasn't like she fought with people. She kind of left that to me sometimes. She was always willing to talk with people as long as it took. She would talk into the night about, it's not just about the emotional attachment here or there. We have to look at what's real. We have to look at where people are struggling for liberation and where we, our government, our tax dollars, our military, are responsible. And she was never prepared to just stand back and say, it's okay if you're progressive on most things. That was never okay. She was never one to check boxes and say, until you can check every box, you can't come to our protests. Connie did not have a sectarian bone in her body. And she dealt with a lot of people who did, I gotta say. But she had a way of being clear that it's not about making people sign off on this petition or that sign-on letter before you can be considered part of the movement. Everybody is part of the movement when they do anything for justice. But it's our job as organizers to make sure it doesn't stop there. That's step one. That's not step last. So we always have a ton of work to do in all of these movements. And as we became friends over those years, in the houses on the river, the house in Hastings and then the house in Beacon, I started to see these passions of Connie and how they fit together. She had three, besides all of those that I just talked about, she had three other amazing passions. She had a passion for internationalism and the UN, making the UN into something better than it was, but for internationalism as something that had to be at the root of our movement as much as anti-racism and anti-sexism and concern for the climate and all those other things. Why did I say climate? But she also had a specific passion for the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. It was the essence of justice. And it was something that, as we know, around the world, this was a movement that moved people who had never moved before in a progressive direction. It was so clear. The evil of apartheid was so indefensible. There was no pro-apartheid lobby in the United States. There was plenty of money supporting apartheid in the United States, but they never had the nerve to come out. They never had the nerve to come out and try and debate with the anti-apartheid movement. Nobody could do that. And Connie was at the core of all of that. I'll have another story of being in Connie's house at, I think it was 3 o'clock in the morning. We were in the midst of this campaign that had to do with the United Nations, it had to do with the anti-apartheid movement and the Iraq War. It had to do with an effort that we were making very privately to bring Nelson Mandela to shame the Security Council. We thought if anything could stop this war, the Security Council, if they were shamed, maybe could do something. And who in the world could shame the United Nations Security Council other than Nelson Mandela? And it was a whole complicated story, which I won't get into, but it involved people from South Africa, it involved some diplomats, and it involved Harry Belafonte. His job, he had a very important job. He had to get through the gatekeepers of President Mandela's office, which was known to be an impossible task, because they were very, very protected. Nobody who worked in his office wanted anybody to ask him to do anything that was going to take any more of his energy. People were so protected. Only Harry was able to get through. And he got through, and he was calling me to tell me, and he was somewhere, I don't know where he was, but he wasn't in the same time zone. I was in the same time zone, but I wasn't home. I was at Connie's house. And Harry called me at like 3 o'clock in the morning to say, we got approval. And I was like, oh my God. And then the next thing he said was, oh, I'm so sorry, did I wake you up? And I said, Harry, do you know how many people there are in this world who would give their eye teeth to hear your voice at 8 o'clock? It's a lovely moment at that. But Connie was part of all of that kind of work. She was part of the behind-the-scenes work, and she was out there with a bullhorn leading the chants, and everywhere in between. She was part of the reason that the banks in Westchester pulled their money out of apartheid South Africa. She was part of what built the ties, the sister city ties, with cities in South Africa, with settlements in South Africa. All of that was part of it. Her other great passion, stopping nuclear weapons. And thankfully, Connie did get to see the closing down of Indian Point. At least that. And I think that all of the arrests and the sit-ins and the die-ins and the education and the teachings that Connie helped us lead all those years was a huge part of what suppressed that nuclear danger for a long time. And now we have a ton of work to do in Connie's name, because right now we have never been at risk to the degree that we are at risk right now. The reason for saying that we need immediate ceasefire and immediate negotiations in Ukraine is not only because too many Ukrainians are dying today. It's because this war, unlike earlier horrifying wars, unlike the war in Afghanistan, unlike the war in Iraq, even unlike the war in Syria, where the US and Russian troops and pilots and planes were there on opposite sides challenging each other. It was a very dangerous moment. But not one of those wars had the possibility of this current war of leading to a nuclear escalation. And I think if Connie was here, she would say, get out there and do it. Get out there and start that mobilization again. And so many other passions. The passion for the climate, and particularly for the Hudson River. Her ties with Pete Toshi was so bound up with protection of the river and singing the songs of the river, singing the songs of children being able to swim in the river for the first time. All of those things link back to the damage that's being done by the current war in Ukraine, damage to certainly the Ukrainian environment, but threatening the environment around the world, just like it's threatening greater hunger and famine around the world as a result of this war. And the question, her other passion, of mentoring young people. And this is where I've had Connie and Harry in my mind all week. Because of the work that both of them did with generations, recognizing the generations on whose shoulders they stood, and recognizing the generations that have come along. What Connie has done with the creation of WESPAC, the building of WESPAC, and the turning over of WESPAC to a new generation, to continue its work on Palestine, to continue its work on justice, on fighting racism, on fighting for the planet. All of that is part of the job of the next generation. And Connie understood that from the very moment that she created that organization. She knew that the part of it was going to be, how do I transition to the next one? And when Manhattanville College built the Connie Hogarth Center for Social Justice, that's what that was all about. It wasn't about having something with Connie's name on it. It was about having young kids who were going to learn from the best, who were going to learn how to be troublemakers and agitators and activists in the best possible way. When Reverend Barber called me a few months ago to tell me about his latest plot, which he'd been working on for a year, which is the opening of the new, see if I get the title right, the Center for People's Theology and People's Policy. That's it, I think, something like that. The idea is for Reverend Barber and Reverend Liz and the other incredible organizers of the Poor People's Campaign and the preparers of the breach to train up a new generation of, in their case, faith-based activists to be the troublemakers in the churches and to use the credentials of the churches to be troublemakers everywhere, in Congress and everywhere else where power lies. And the mentoring of those young people is very much at the root of what all of this is about. So everything that Connie loved, the music, her ties with Pete and Toshi, her adoration for Emma's Revolution, she brought national organizing to a local committee, to a local community. And she brought the understanding and the grounding of that local community to the national environment in which Connie worked as well. And she leaves behind so much. She leaves behind a Westchester better than it ever would have been. She leaves behind a WESPAC with an incredible staff, an incredible board, an incredible action, policy work to change the world. There are fewer power plants than there would have been. There's a generation who, at least on some level, understands the need to link opposition to nuclear power and nuclear weapons with their broader opposition to what's being done to the climate in their name. She's brought up a generation of agitators and organizers and troublemakers, all in her name. And we're grateful.
Everybody's mentioned the personal and the political, but I think that all comes together in the themes of what we've all heard. And to continue that conversation of the personal and the political, I'd like to invite Andrew Courtney to the stage to make a few comments.
I wish I brought my dog also. Phyllis Pup and Amy Pup. A little story, just a Connie story that will stays in my mind always. And I hear today again the reminding notion from Howard and from Charlie and from Amy and everybody else, the current term intersectionality. I think this is an intersectionality story. It was, and Leslie Kagan, thank you for wherever you're sitting out there.
Here.
Where are you, Leslie? Yeah, thanks for informing me earlier, because now I'm sure it was the 1982 UN Commission on Disarmament. How do you say it again? The UN, what? Disarmament. It was the big one, and it was 750,000 people in the sheep meadow in Central Park. Connie was one of the primary organizers. There were 30 or 40 hibakusha Japanese survivors from Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and an awful lot of people. And that was a series of several days, not just the big gathering in Central Park, 750,000, but the next Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday there were to be, and there was, civil disobedience actions. One of which I'm pretty sure was at the UN consulate building there across from the UN, and I was part of it. And we, of course, were trained by Charlie at the WESPAC in the wonderful aspects of civil disobedience training, developing what is an affinity group. I didn't know what the hell an affinity group was until Charlie informed us how to come together on the notion of what is it like to be arrested, with Connie and a bunch of people on one side of the room playing the roles of the police, and the rest of us over here being the roles of the activists, and then swapping just to feel out the whole kind of energy and the pacifism necessary for that moment of arrest. Well, okay, Monday comes, and there were so many people arrested that day. Those buses, those police buses, those big sort of buses that hold 55, they were filled up and filled up and filled up with arrestees, all hoisted down to one police plaza. There were so many that had to be processed that the police down there said they did a turnstile effort, you know? I gave the name T-Pain, the person next to me gave M-Mouse, and they didn't care. And we went back and got arrested again. I remember that day, 2 arrests. Connie got arrested with me in that first bus. Now, many of you know Connie always wore a white dress. The same, I don't know if it's the same white dress, but a white dress for all her civil disobedience arrests. Whether it was Seabrook or whether it was up at Groton, Connecticut with those damn submarines or Indian, where the white dress was Connie's kind of symbolic I'm getting arrested dress. She had on the white dress, and we were piling into that bus with 55 other arrestees, and they had just invented the new handcuffs, the white zip skins, you know? Those white guys that you get. And so we were all in the bus, and Connie figured out how to get with the ties, how to figure out how to pull out of her, whatever she had, a purse or something, 5 or 6 pieces of origami paper. Yellow, red, blue, pink. And in the bus were other arrestees and the arresting cop. A woman cop, I'll never forget this. And you're waiting, they're waiting to get hauled down to one police plaza. Connie instructed 3 or 4 people, and me, and the arresting cop, how to make a peace crane. You know, when you're manacled, right? That's not that easy to make the peace crane in the bus. Now that's intersectionality. Anyway, so that's my story I'll always remember from my good friend and mentor, serious mentor for life, Connie Hogarth. Thanks a lot.
Leslie Kagan, now that I know you're here, would you step up to the stage?
I had no idea. On the computer here, it says this is National Football Team. National Football Team. So I don't remember precisely when Connie and I met. I think it was in the late 1970s. I'm sure it was at a meeting. we over the years spent a lot of time in meetings. And that was during our participation in mobilization for survival. Some of you might remember it. She was there coming out of Westchester. I was there coming out of Boston, Cambridge, organizing. So, and we kind of knew each other and would find ourselves in the corners of the meetings together, but didn't really get to know each other until about 1981 in the organizing for the 1982 mass mobilization that we just heard about, June 12, 1982. There's a footnote on history. It was 750,000 people in the park. There were several 100,000 people people who never made it into the park. Just as a point of reference there. Over the years, Connie and I, our lives and our work intersected, found each other many, many times on a range of campaigns and projects and organizing efforts, from the Rainbow Coalition and both of Jackson's presidential campaigns organized around nuclear disarmament, then several years after the 82, I think it was 1988, when the UN convened a third session of disarmament, and it time for another third session. One of the things that really stands out to me, though, was the WBAI work that Amy referenced. And I remember, I don't recall the day it happened, but I remember what happened. The phone rang one day. Connie was calling me. This, by the way, was not a cell phone. This was like, you know, a phone that plugged into the wall that you dialed. Anyway, I was home. She got me. And she asked me would I be available and interested in joining the local WBAI board. So that, and she was very clear about that, the point of my joining the local board was that then they could send me to the National Pacifica Board and take up that struggle. It wasn't until several years later when it dawned on me that Connie put that on me when she could have done it just as well. There's no time or need to go into the gory details of that struggle, but that was brutal, right, Amy? Yeah. So thank you, Connie, for that one. We traveled together, we organized more marches than I can remember, and as I said, more meetings and conferences and gatherings than anybody could imagine being at. In all those moments, in all those situations, in addition to often being the most competent person in the room, and often also being the one least hesitant to take on the nitty-gritty details of what it takes to actually get things done. Connie could also be counted on in those national settings to represent the work here in Westchester. I too came into national work. I did come out, but I too came into national work out of years of local organizing. And through that, I grew to understand just how important both arenas of work are, the local and the national, and of course, the international. Connie was the living expression of that understanding. It was not only about connecting issues, it was also knowing that the changes we fight for have to be won locally and nationally. That there should be no competition or hierarchy of importance between local work and national work. For Connie, think locally, act locally, think locally, act locally was more than a slogan. It was a way of life. Connie, as Phyllis said, was a generation older than me, older than some of us in this room now. And we do stand on her shoulders and many, many other people. She led, the life that she led was all about forging ahead with the work, remembering where that work came from, what we are grounded in, and those who come behind us, hopefully working with us. And even in these most challenging of times, let me say that another way, perhaps especially because these are the most challenging of times, we need to continue the work that Connie did, that taught us, that inspired us, that moved us, that made us happy, that made us angry about the state of the world, that kept us all going. And it is in that context that saying Connie Hogarth presented is easy to say.
It's been just a great honor for me to be able to do this today, and I thank you all for having me. I do have, Charlie Brenner just handed me his cell phone with a message from Ross Hogarth, his son, who asked us to read this quote from George Bernard Shaw. "This is the true joy in life, being used for a purpose recognized by yourself as a mighty one. Being a force of nature instead of a feverish, selfish little clod of ailments and grievances, complaining that the world will not devote itself to making you happy. I am of the opinion that my life belongs to the whole community, and as long as I live, it is my privilege to do for it what I can. I want to be thoroughly used up when I die, for the harder I work, the more I live. I rejoice in life for its own sake. Life is no brief candle to me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I have got hold of for the moment, and I want to make it burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations." Thank you.
Coming all the way from California. Thank you so much for Amy Goodman, your very busy schedule for coming. Phyllis Bennis, train up, taking the train right after this, and really appreciate it so much. Thank you to Ron Karen, who prepared this beautiful journal that you all have with you. We really appreciate it. All the members of the planning team. I know there are people on Zoom and people here who wanted to share stories, but we unfortunately do not have time for any stories. However, I've been thinking, sitting here, I would like to create a memorial page on the WESPAC website where we will preserve this recording of this beautiful 2 hours that we've all spent today, where each of you can share a Connie story, and we will post it on Connie's memorial page, where you can share your photos, your precious memories, your video clips. We will create a memorial page to honor her memory and to continue the work as well. And that's just where I want to say all of us can help keep Connie's alive by continuing our support of WESPAC. And the two big events we have coming up, our annual awards in June. We have invitations outside if you haven't already RSVP'd, and if you are unable to attend, you're welcome to support the event with an ad or just with a contribution. So please pick up an invitation on your way out. You can visit our website for updates on upcoming events, join our email list, you can sign up, we have a sign-in sheet outside, follow us on social media, use our beautiful office space for your social justice related events. We have so much to offer. WESPAC makes Westchester a better place to live. Yeah, we can clap for that. WESPAC nurtures the progressive movement and makes crucial connections to foster solidarity. WESPAC needs our collective support. Thank you all very much for coming. There is some delicious Middle Eastern food outside that I hear Connie loved Middle Eastern food. Falafel sandwiches, there's spinach pies, there's cheese pies, za'atar pies, hummus, ful madamas. There's a delicious Middle Eastern dessert as well. So I want to make sure there's time because the library will close. Welcome, enjoy yourselves. Thank you for coming. Connie presente.
May I read Connie's birth address?
Yes, please, Vane. I was just writing. I was sad we didn't get to hear it.
Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry,
Please
Carl,
do.
you didn't have a chance, but
It's very short. It's very short and it's so worth it. It's a perfect ending.
2 minutes.
For those of us that are still here, right?
hear anything. I don't know why. But I cannot hear you, but I see you.
Do you hear me now?
Oh. Now, try now.
Four
Try now.
score and can
What's
you hear
that?
me now?
Yeah, I can.
Four score and 6 years ago, her parents brought forth on this continent a new humanist, conceived in liberty,